Yeah, so we are looking at the solutions to the problems. In the first place, we saw what we call the problems faced by the early church apostles. So after looking at the problems that these people faced, each problem was given a solution. Remember, the early church apostles faced challenges: language barrier, transport and communication, the diseases, persecution, limited materials and the funds. And then they had a problem of false preachers and disunity amongst them. What happened later, after these people facing such challenges, the solutions were made to at least to eliminate these challenges and to make the gospel easily spread. So we have to see what solutions that were put in place to overcome the problems in the apostolic period, in the apostolic church. One, the early church apostles or the early church leaders did not sit back and relax and see things moving the way they were moving. So they made attempts to address the problems they faced. That is why they were now successful in their preaching. The early church apostles, after going through a lot, they did not sit back and relax. They went ahead and then they looked for solutions for the problems that they were facing. The early church apostles, they were able to look, for example, if let me say amendments are all putting resolutions in place in order to eliminate the challenges that they were facing. One, they started writing the letters and gospels which were to solve different problems or different questions that were posed by the converts. The early church apostles, they faced a number of challenges. For example, a lot of questions were being asked by the new converts. And these people, to answer some of the questions, they had to write different letters and gospels. Look at the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of John, the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke. All these gospels were written to answer questions and even to deliver different message to different people. So they started to write these gospels which solved problems like continuous movement for long distances or journeys, fading memories, and the misinterpretation of the scriptures. Remember, people had started to misinterpret different Bible scriptures, and therefore these people, to answer or to solve such problems, they had to write the gospel down. And this gospel was written in order, for example, if anyone had a question, they could just go and read in the gospels that were written. And at the end of the day, problems of misinterpretation and questions were solved, fading memories. So that means by the time these people started to fade, by the time these people started to die, already they had the gospel already written, and new generations could just go and revise that gospel. Another one, they resorted to free sharing of resources as brothers and sisters, and this solved the poverty and limited resources question or problem that had developed amongst them. A time came and they had to just sit back and share resources to solve the problems of poverty and limited resources. They also carried out catechism, which strengthened the faith of new believers in this, and this reduced what we call backslide in faith. In order to solve the problem of backslide in faith, the early church apostles had to take the converts into catechism. They used to take them into teachings. They used to teach people the gospel, teach them how to preach, teach them how to associate with one another. This later on strengthened their faith and made them to live as one family. They also went ahead. Members also resorted to what we call continuous praying together, and in the process, they encouraged one another, and this really strengthened their hopes, and later on, they became more determined. Determination developed amongst them due to the fact that they prayed together, they moved together, they associated with one another, and at the end of the day, problems of disunity were solved. Counseling and guidance was observed, was one of the strategies that the early church members took to solve the problems that had developed amongst them, backsliding and etc. Counseling amongst the early church apostles, some of them were good counselors. They used to counsel one another to strengthen their faith. They used to counsel one another to at least to solve different disputes. So there was counseling and guidance, and this was adopted and also minimized the problems of backsliding and strengthened their faith. The early church leaders always came into settle different disputes and conflicts amongst their fellow church members and amongst the church leaders. So at the end of the day, after settling disputes, unity, they ended up fellowshipping with one another. The early church members also decided to form what we call the canon, the canonicity. This is when they started now to eliminate some books that had been written, because some people started to deliver what we call false information. So this made the early church apostles to sit back and select different books that carried what we call information about Jesus' ministry, and others were left out because some of the leaders who called themselves apostles, yet they were false, they were taking this as an advantage. This later on helped them. They conducted what we call continuous fellowship amongst themselves. So they used to gather in different places, fellowshipping with one another, preaching the gospel, fellowshipping. They promoted what we call the brotherhood. There was brotherhood amongst them. At the end of the day, this strengthened the church, as we're going to see. Leaders adopted adopted what we call living poetic life to help them overcome opponents. Let me see, protective. There's a change. Protective life as they lived as one family. So they started now to protect one another from opposition. Remember, this is the time when they were facing a lot of persecution. They were arrested, they were beaten. So they now resorted. They got ways of protecting themselves from the persecutors and opposers. They also carried out regular theological debates, which enabled them to answer the questions that had been asked by the people due to the misinterpretation of the gospel by the false preachers. So these people started now to carry out debates. They used to gather in public. They used to gather the public. They sit. They listen to the questions that have been posed by the converts. At the end of the day, they used to give them answers and make them getting convinced and limiting the chances of false misinterpretation of the gospel. The Roman Empire developed what we call technology, which helped members to overcome the problem of language barrier, illiteracy, poor transport and communication. So when the transport and communication was solved, at the end of the day, it made the movement of the early church preachers very easy, because they could now move from one area to another, going on preaching, spreading the gospel. At the end of the day, their work was now softened or was made easier than before. So those are the solutions to the problems that the early church were facing at the times. I beg to submit from here and have a good day.